By early 1943, the Second World War had entered a decisive phase. The Allies were preparing for the eventual invasion of Europe, while Germany was desperately searching for a way to strike back. Deep within the forests of northern France and the Baltic coast of Pomerania, a new menace was being assembled in utmost secrecy, the Vergeltungswaffen, or vengeance weapons. These would soon be known to the world as the V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 rocket, Adolf Hitler's so-called miracle weapons, intended to turn the tide of the war. The intelligence trickle began when Royal Air Force reconnaissance flights captured curious images of strange ramp-like structures and unusual buildings in the Pas-de-Calais region. At first, Allied analysts could not agree on their purpose. Some thought they were new types of coastal defenses. Others suspected something far more dangerous. By mid-1943, reports from the French resistance confirmed that the Germans were working on long-range weapons capable of striking Britain without risking Luftwaffe aircraft. In London, the stakes became clear. Prime Minister Winston Churchill feared that such weapons could terrorize civilian populations, disrupt invasion plans, and shatter morale. The British Chiefs of Staff demanded immediate action. This urgency gave birth to what would later be called Operation Crossbow, the Allied campaign to locate and destroy Germany's V-weapon program before it could be unleashed on Britain. The RAF and the US 8th Air Force began planning heavy bombing raids against suspected launch sites, but the challenge was immense. The sites were heavily camouflaged, defended by anti-aircraft guns, and scattered across northern France. Moreover, German engineers worked tirelessly to protect their projects, moving materials under cover of night and constructing decoy facilities to confuse Allied pilots. It was not simply a matter of sending bombers, it was a race against time. Every week that passed brought the Germans closer to operational readiness. If the V-1 and V-2 could be deployed in large numbers, London and other cities could be devastated in ways the Blitz had never achieved. The prospect was so alarming that even top-secret ultra-decrypts from Bletchley Park were diverted to track V-weapon progress, giving the Allies an invaluable edge. This was more than a military mission. It was a fight to protect the home front, to safeguard the future invasion of Europe, and to ensure the war could be won on Allied terms. And if you want to see how this high-stakes cat-and-mouse game unfolded, from daring spy missions to precision bombing, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others who love history. This is just the beginning of the story. By the autumn of 1943, the race to identify and neutralize Germany's V-weapon facilities had become a top Allied priority. Aerial reconnaissance, spy networks, and intercepted communications began to converge into a clearer picture. The Pas-de-Calais region, already heavily fortified against a potential Allied landing, appeared to be the epicenter of the threat. The most significant breakthrough came from the French resistance. Local operatives, risking execution at every step, infiltrated construction zones and smuggled out sketches of colossal concrete structures unlike anything seen before. These ski sites, named for their distinctive sloping ramps, were built to launch V-1 flying bombs toward London. Their elongated shapes and parallel rail lines were designed to accelerate the pilotless aircraft to deadly speeds before release. Yet the true scale of the menace remained elusive. Alongside these visible sites, the Germans hid underground bunkers and assembly halls deep within forests, making them nearly invisible to high-altitude reconnaissance photography. To complicate matters further, the Luftwaffe stationed flak batteries nearby, creating lethal barriers for any low-level bombing attempts. Intelligence analysts at the Air Ministry debated their options. The US 8th Air Force favored mass daylight raids for accuracy, while the RAF preferred night attacks to minimize bomber losses. But with winter approaching, unpredictable weather made precision bombing even more difficult. The Germans exploited this, accelerating their work during overcast days when reconnaissance flights were impossible. One particular site, the Epperlex blockhouse, emerged as a primary concern. This gigantic bunker, capable of withstanding heavy bombardment, was intended as a launch and storage hub for the V-2 rocket. Built with slave labor under brutal conditions, it was designed to operate even under constant attack. Destroying such a fortress would demand more than conventional bombing runs, it required a sustained campaign. By November, Allied command had enough evidence to authorize systematic strikes. The first wave of raids targeted ski sites in Pas-de-Calais, attempting to disrupt construction before they became operational. Although some structures were damaged, others were quickly repaired, revealing the grim reality: the Germans were determined, resourceful, and unwilling to abandon their vengeance program. The intelligence war was now fully engaged. Every bomb dropped was measured against the ticking clock of German readiness. Every reconnaissance photo was scrutinized for clues. And every intercepted German message carried the weight of London's survival. The hunt was far from over. The most difficult phase, sustained and coordinated destruction of these launch sites, was about to begin. By January 1944, the Allies had shifted from sporadic raids to a deliberate, sustained offensive against the Nazi V-weapon program. The operation was codenamed Crossbow, and its objective was simple in theory but formidable in execution: deny Germany the ability to launch its new wonder weapons before they could change the course of the war. RAF Bomber Command and the US 8th Air Force coordinated attacks to keep pressure constant. Daylight raids by American heavy bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, aimed to cripple the most critical components of launch facilities with precision bombing. At night, the RAF Lancasters and Halifaxes followed with area bombardments designed to disrupt construction work and destroy supply depots. Weather, however, was an unrelenting enemy. Northern France in winter offered few clear days for accurate strikes, and cloud cover often obscured targets at the exact moment bombers arrived. The Germans exploited these gaps, working rapidly to repair damaged ramps, bunkers, and storage sites. Resistance reports told of construction crews laboring day and night, their efforts lit by floodlights even during air raids. The Epperlex blockhouse became a symbol of this deadly cat-and-mouse struggle. Despite repeated bombings, its thick concrete shell absorbed immense punishment. High-altitude bombing inflicted craters and surface damage, but the core facilities remained intact. In March, the Allies introduced tallboy bombs, massive, deep-penetration explosives designed by Barnes-Wallis, in hopes of breaching the bunker's defenses. The results were promising but not decisive. Meanwhile, intelligence identified new launch sites disguised among civilian buildings, farmyards, and forest clearings. These modified sites were quicker to build and harder to spot. They allowed the Germans to disperse their operations, making total elimination impossible. The Allies faced a grim reality. Even with relentless bombing, some V-1 and V-2 attacks were inevitable. At the highest levels of Allied command, Crossbow was now competing for resources with the upcoming Normandy invasion. Eisenhower insisted that the V-weapon threat could not jeopardize D-Day's success. Churchill, haunted by memories of the Blitz, argued for continued heavy attacks to protect London. The compromise was a balance. Crossbow would receive priority strikes whenever weather and operational schedules allowed, but it could not overshadow preparations for Operation Overlord. By spring 1944, the air over northern France roared with constant Allied bomber traffic. Yet for every site destroyed, another seemed to appear. The war against the V-weapons was entering a critical phase, with the clock ticking toward their first operational launches. On June 13, 1944, just a week after Allied troops landed in Normandy, the first V-1 flying bomb roared across the English Channel. Londoners, already weary from years of war, heard the strange buzzing drone of its pulsejet engine. When the engine cut out, silence fell for a few seconds before the weapon slammed into the city with a thunderous explosion. It was the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter. Within days, V-1s were being launched in waves from northern France. Their range allowed them to reach London and the southeast coast with ease. Traveling at over 350 miles per hour, they were difficult but not impossible to intercept. RAF Tempest fighters, along with Spitfires and Mosquitoes, were scrambled to chase them down, sometimes tipping their wings to destabilize the missile mid-flight. Anti-aircraft guns were repositioned in a defensive belt along the coast, and barrage balloons added another layer of protection. The V-2 rocket was even more menacing. Unlike the V-1, it traveled at supersonic speed, striking its target before any warning could be given. First used against Paris and then London in September 1944, the V-2 was unstoppable once launched. Its impact cratered entire streets, killing dozens in a single strike. The psychological shock was immense. There was no defense, no air raid siren, only sudden devastation. Allied intelligence and photo reconnaissance now raced against time to locate every launch site. Mobile V-1 ramps were dismantled and relocated in hours, while V-2 launchers required even less preparation, often firing from woodland clearings or hidden farmyards. The Luftwaffe's desperate attempts to protect these sites included heavy camouflage and the use of decoy structures to mislead bombers. Operation Crossbow shifted into overdrive. Bombing raids targeted suspected launch zones, supply depots, and transport links feeding the V-weapon network. Rail lines in Belgium and northern France were repeatedly struck to hinder movement of rockets and fuel. Resistance operatives provided vital ground reports, risking execution to pass coordinates to London. By late 1944, V-1 launches from France had ceased as the Allies advanced, but the Luftwaffe began firing them from within German territory. V-2s, with their far greater range, continued to strike British cities until the final weeks of the war. In total, over 9,500 V-1s and more than 3,000 V-2s were launched. The toll was heavy, thousands of civilians killed, tens of thousands injured, and vast areas of housing destroyed. Yet despite the terror, Britain did not break. Churchill later wrote that the V-weapons might have been decisive if they had come earlier, but by mid-1944, they were simply too late to turn the tide. By the opening months of 1945, the once fearsome V-weapon campaign was faltering. The Allied advance across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands had overrun most of the original launch sites. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt by moving V-1 ramps into western Germany and using air-launched V-1s dropped from Heinkel He-111 bombers, but by then, Allied fighter patrols and radar coverage made such missions costly and largely ineffective. The V-2 rocket remained a greater challenge. Its mobility and speed meant it could still be fired from concealed positions in the Netherlands toward London, Antwerp, and other cities. Antwerp, vital to Allied logistics after its liberation, became a prime target. Between October 1944 and March 1945, hundreds of V2s slammed into the port city, aiming to cripple its ability to supply the advancing Allied armies. London also continued to endure sporadic attacks, each one a grim reminder that the war was not yet won. The Allied response relied on three pillars: relentless strategic bombing, aggressive ground advances, and precision intelligence gathering. Bomber Command and the U.S. 8th Air Force maintained pressure on suspected launch areas, rail hubs, and manufacturing centers such as Piedmont, where the V-weapons had been developed. The destruction of bridges and rail lines hampered the movement of both V-1s and V-2s. Meanwhile, the rapid Allied push through the Low Countries brought frontline units ever closer to the final firing positions. Resistance agents and captured German documents revealed vital details of launch procedures and fuel storage sites. Every such lead was pursued, with reconnaissance flights photographing potential hiding spots for mobile V2 crews. By March 1945, as the Allies crossed the Rhine, most remaining launch units were forced into retreat, their capacity to strike greatly diminished. On March 27, 1945, the last V2 landed on British soil, striking Orpington in Kent. It killed 1 person and injured 23, a final tragic reminder of the weapon's deadly power. In the following weeks, as Germany collapsed under the weight of the Allied and Soviet offensives, all remaining V-weapon activity ceased. The launch crews either surrendered or were captured, and the once secret rocket sites lay abandoned. In total, the V-weapon campaign had inflicted significant human and material loss but had failed to achieve its strategic aim. Rather than forcing Britain or the Allies to negotiate, it had hardened their resolve. Post-war analysis revealed that the vast resources devoted to the V-weapons had drained German industry of men, steel, and fuel that might have been used for more conventional, and arguably more effective, armaments. By May 1945, Operation Crossbow was over. The V-weapons had been silenced, but their legacy would shape the early Cold War, as both East and West sought to harness the technology that had once terrorized London.